Mobil telefonları söndürüb və ya səssiz rejimə qoymağını xahiş edirik. Birazdan forum davam edəcək. Xanımlar və cənablar, hörmətli forum iştirakçıları, hörmətli media nümayəndələri. Sizi Azərbaycan Respublikasının dövlət müstəqilliyinin 30-cu il dönümünə əsr olunmuş Azərbaycan Dövlət İqtisad Universiteti tərəfindən təşkil olunan Zəfər Yolu adlı iqtisadi forumda salamlayırıq. 44 günlük vətən müharibəmizdə zəfər çalıb canından keçən bütün şəhidlərimizi bir dəqiqəlik sükutla yad edək. Allah rəhmət eləsin, igid əskərlər üçün ölüm yox, şəhidlik zirvəsi var. Hörmətli forum iştirakçıları, biraz öncə birinci panel müzakirəmiz başa çatdı. Panel spikerləri Azərbaycanın gələcək inkişaf strategiyasından bəhs etdilər. Gələcək inkişaf yolunda qlobal trendlər və yerli faktorlara toxundular. Dəyərli qonaqlar, hörmətli forum iştirakçıları, indi isə gənc alim və tədqiqatçıların İqtisadçı Qrzeqorz Kołodkonin ilə görüşü başlayır. Görkəmli iqtisadiyyat professoru və Polşa iqtisadi islahatlarının əsas memarı olan cənab Kołodkoni və moderator qismində Neyman Muradlını kürsüyə dəvət edirik. Buyurun.
Who is speaking? You? You or me?
Let me give you a brief introduction, then you can speak. Thank you very much, dear Thank you very much, dear audience, participating at this panel. And as mentioned, Professor Kołodkonin will discuss certain points specifically about globalization, irreversibility of globalization, and its impact on socio-economic development on the globe. And within that topic, he will have approximately an hour-long discussion. Then, of course, we will be happy to hear if you have any questions, to respond those questions as well. And thank you very much, Professor. Please go on.
Thank you very much. The time is running fast. So I said a little bit during the previous panel, and I presented as a good professor PowerPoint presentation. I'm glad that we have still such a big audience here, because it happened during certain presentation that the speaker was speaking, and then only one single person was left in the auditorium. And professor is saying, thank you very much that you have stayed remained here till the end of my presentation, but please tell me, everybody left, and you remained, you stayed here till the end. Why? And he says, because I'm the next speaker. So we are still a big crowd here, and let me share some of views, some of the points, but I will be back with the comments which there was not the time to share during our panel after my presentation. Why the tiger is here? Because I'm founder and director of the small but important think tank, which is called Transformation, Integration, and Globalization Economic Research, in short, TIGER, at Kozminiski University, the leading business and law school in our part of the world. So you may visit the page, TIGER EDU-PL, and then click Director, Publications, Papers, plenty of them on different topics in many languages, including English, Chinese, and Turkish, not yet Azeri, but why not in the future? So let me share with you some views, because I'm two in one, as wash and go. I'm a man of science, university professor, a researcher, scholar, but since my research has been policy-oriented, and in this case it means economic policy-oriented, I'm more macro. I feel macroeconomics, economic policy, political economy, globalization, international relations much better than, say, business management, yet I'm teaching now a couple of courses at the School of Business. So I said, times go so fast today, but also in the historical times. Take a look. That is the, I'm saying, the historical furniture, Polish round table. Unlike the other nations, our elites, both the reform-oriented government and advisors and the so-called democratic opposition, sat down around the table on February 6th, 1989, and actually we have contributed to the change of the history. That was the beginning of the end, or the end of the beginning, of the previous centrally planned economy and monoparty autocratic authoritarian system. And I asked the second fella to me, when I was sitting there, take a look, there is so many journalists, I never seen so many journalists in my lifetime. He said, you know, professor, because I was already professor at that time, because this is the most important day in the history of Europe since World War II. I wasn't sure that that is the case that time, but then we shifted forward. But don't make mistake, Poland was similar like Hungary, a little bit different than former Yugoslavia, reformed to quite a big extent. It was a little bit of political pluralism. It wasn't just an authoritarian regime like, for instance, in Romania or in Bulgaria. And we did have a little bit of market economy, very little from today's viewpoint, but still it was somehow involved in elasticity and market-oriented activities. So the transition, when we are talking about transition, it's a fourfold process: to market, to democracy in our case, but also to new institutions. And in economic sense, it is a shift from centrally planned socialist economy to the social market, open, deregulated economy, where most important was, same as in Azerbaijan with all the different criteria, liberalization and stabilization, because liberalization, especially liberalization of prices, caused a lot of inflation. It was privatization. There is not market economy without dominance of private sector, but not with omnipotence of private sector. There is still a room for state sector and for mixed forms of ownership. But most important is institutional building. Since the onset of transition, I have known that the most important is not liberalization or privatization, but institutional building, and that this conclusion is still valid after 33 years after our roundtable or 30 years since you've got independence. And then changing also, transition to the new culture. How have we done? Better than anybody else in our part of the world, but not much better than the world. As you see on this chart, if you measure the progress by GDP per capita on purchasing power parity, our economy was growing by and large the same as the world, but much faster than any post-communist or post-socialist countries of former Soviet Union and and Eastern Europe, and much faster than any country in Western Europe. So here Poland is shown as a successful story, but be sure, it is average. If you will take a closer look how we have progressed during that period of time, there were ups and downs, ups and downs, ups and downs. Why? Very much because of politics. Because we shifted to democracy, not only to market, and we have elections by and large from every 4 or 5 years. We do elect president, we do elect the parliament, we have also local elections, and since a certain period of time we participate in the European election, and the public mood is shifting left of the center, right of the center, towards more of neoliberalism or more populism. And as you may see, it started from this ill-advised neoliberal shock without therapy, and then there was my strategy for Poland when I was Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance in 3 subsequent governments, when we brought unemployment down by 1/3, inflation down by 2/3, and GDP jumped by 28% per capita. And so the story of Polish transformation to market, our successful story, is actually contrary to propaganda and all of this blah, blah, blah of some of my colleagues, not a result of so-called shock therapy, but rather of a gradual shift from shock failure to gradual therapy with some time deterioration or improvement of economic policies. The most important was Strategy for Poland. That is my program of institutional change, structural reforms, and social economic development. It is called For Poland, but that was very much a concept of becoming more and more engaged in globalization, about which I talked a little bit before. But again, geopolitical position does matter. We are where we are. So for us, there was theoretically, politically a choice, but in practice, there was not a choice. We must join the European Union. That was our historical chance, and that was our opportunity. So we have joined the European Union, but before that, a quarter of a century ago, I brought Poland to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, which was not just because beauty of our girls and handsome of our boys. That was the result of hard reforms, market-oriented, and microeconomic restructuring, and denationalization, and institutional building, and this had opened the gate, the road towards European Union, and at that time we signed already association agreement with the European Union. So maybe that would make a sense to consider in a country like Azerbaijan to apply to join the OECD, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, and then to use the criteria of joining this organization of mostly rich countries, because there are also some countries which are not rich, like, for instance, in some time, Colombia or Chile, or since a long period of time, like Mexico, or since very long period of time, for a political, not economic reason, Turkey is the member of OECD. And then we joined the European Union. Take a look on the picture. Current president, prime minister, former prime minister, minister of foreign affairs, former minister of foreign affairs, everybody is laughing or smiling. But I am thinking, because I had known that joining the European Union is the very successful day on our historical process towards world economy, but it will cause new kind of problems which did not exist before at early stage of transition or under the centrally planetary regime. So now we are rather trying to catch up, if still you measure by GDP, which is a little bit misleading measure. We have to shift to more complex measurement of economic development. We are approaching Italy and Spain. Our GDP per capita is already higher in Poland than in Portugal or Greece, the other countries of so-called old OECD. So what is Poland now? It's a middle open economy with GDP per capita twice as high as in the world, but only 75% of the European Union average, or only 50% of the United States, but still catching up, growing and developing faster than countries with similar level of development in Southeast Asia or in Latin America or in Eastern Europe, and much faster than the rich countries. There are 7 lessons from Polish political economy of transformation or transition to market democracy and new market business culture. First, early reforms do matter. The more one was reformed prior to taking off, which in our case happened in '89, the better. Second, there are always 2 kinds of policies. That is the policy of systemic change, institutionally building, changing the law, and the economic policy. Whatever regulation you do have as of December 2021 in Azerbaijan, they can be different instruments, details of economic policies. Third is I can't see what is third. Don't confuse the means with the ends of the policy. You can read some of my papers, my books you mentioned. I publish a lot. Even this year I published plenty on different topics in 8 languages. You will never find that I was saying, even being finance minister or deputy prime minister, that the most important is fighting inflation, or the most important is real exchange rate, or real positive interest rate, or balanced budget. These are the instruments, the means to the end. And the end is a balanced social, economic, and ecological development. If one is confusing, for instance, fiscal balance with the end of economic policy, one is running the economic policy in the wrong way. Fourth, the policy is smarter, but so does the institution. If you have a good institutions, and I think that we have much better institutions than you have in Azerbaijan for a number of reasons. What can be seen, for instance, through the prism of in the perception of corruption. There is still, everywhere, if there is any corruption, is it United States or China, Poland or Azerbaijan, there is too much of corruption. But definitely there is much more of corruption in country which is institutionally not so strong as is in Poland. But so does the policies. The fifth, as the saying goes, if you count on yourself. So a country like us, lacking a capital, we've been looking for injection of foreign capital, especially since that is the conduit, a channel of transfer of technology, but most important is to raise propensity of saving of the society and to have a sound institutions of financial intermediaries, the capital market and the banking sector, to convert the people's saving into investment and entrepreneurship. Sixth is we are doing without the era of irreversible globalization. So don't even attempt to turn you back as they do, even not far away from here, say, much more in Belarus than in Ukraine, and to different extent in some different countries, sometimes by the wish of their own policies, sometimes because they are forced by external sanctions, like for instance in Iran, against globalization. I said it before, I will skip it here. Always, a piece of strategy for country, is it as small country as Azerbaijan or as big as Russia, is how to take advantage of globalization, the course of globalization to our advantage. And now it is not working. Now it is not working. Again. Okay, and the seventh one is, despite I was finance minister, not minister of culture or education, it's a social and cultural matter. As you see, this transformation, this transition, this opening up, this integration with the world economy has very many different various aspects of social, cultural nature, which cannot be fixed just by manipulating exchange rate or interest rate. So these are basically the lessons, and the missing slide is very important about the institutions. I mentioned already the term earlier, extractive and inclusive institutions. The most important part are the institutions. In behavioral meaning, that means the rules of the game, the law, the regulation, and then they can be friendly for microeconomic entrepreneurship and macroeconomic development, or they can be extractive. And now there was a great deal of confusion during our panel. The panel was designed in such a way that everybody was giving his or her orbi et orbi, and there was not a chance to discuss between us. So, but we are at the scientific academic conference. As the leading university, I have made some notes, and let me make some comments about what we were discussing and following the line. Because there was said a little bit about globalization, slowization, reversibility of globalization, etc. I would say that, well, key challenges and key solutions. This is about these institutions, extractive and inclusive political and economic one. So, globalization thus far, to a very big extent, of the last 2-3 decades, which by no coincidence is overlapping with our systemic transition from socialism, or some says communism, what kind of communism it was, from state socialism to market economy. It is this indispensable part of globalization. Without us, it would not be globalization. What kind of world it would be without the former Soviet Union, Eastern Europe, China, and Indo-China? So this globalization was very much extractive, not inclusive, and it was based on neoliberal economic thinking because it happened at the same time. The things happened the way they do because many things happen at the same time. And when I listen a viewpoint over and over and over again that we have more inequality now because of globalization, I'm saying wrong. Growing inequality in the places it is growing is not caused by globalization. It is not by effect of globalization. This is the effect of neoliberal capitalism. It is growing deliberately and not because of weather. If it is the result of globalization, your government, your economist, your president Aliyev can do nothing. You have to just accept it as the weather. Not at all. Globalization is the result of neoliberal capitalism, which by wrong regulation, wrong institution, which are being developed, enforced deliberately, and by manipulation of the fiscal mechanism, the taxation, transfers, and budgetary expenditure is enriching the few at the cost of many. And you can see it from the United States down the ladder in very many countries. And that is the reason of the political fight in very many countries. My neoliberal colleagues, as you have seen, they were bringing country economic growth down, but at the time, the rich people became richer and richer. So the inequality was growing. During my tenure, economy was growing faster, but the income of the people which were doing relatively, were with a relatively lower income, their income was growing faster. So for instance, if measured by Gini coefficient, it was going down. So therefore, the growing inequality is not the result of globalization, and it is also not true what we heard here, that there is more of the inequality between the nations. Contrary, globalization has contributed to diminishing the inequality between the nations because, say, average income of Mexico was growing faster than of Gringo in US. Income on average in Poland was growing faster than in Germany, in Estonia faster than in Finland, in Hungary faster than in Austria, in Thailand faster than in Korea, and in China faster than in Japan. So now the difference between average income of Poland and German is much shorter than it was, say, 10, 20, 30 years ago. But within the country, because of neoliberal policy, at the time of globalization, inequality was growing. So some policymakers, some journalists, and some biased economists are blaming globalization for growing in inequality. My third point is, we heard it here many times, and you will hear it for, hopefully, not to the end of our time. Emerging market. Take a look. You are an emerging market. You got independence 30 years ago. And since 30 years, you are emerging, and you are emerging, and in December of 2021, you are still emerging. How long you are going to be emerging? It means that somebody has emerged a lot of time ago. And now what is emerging? Business opportunity, investment opportunity. And they call us the developing, trying to catch up part of the world. They call it in the rich part of the world, emerging market. I don't use this term anymore. I did make this mistake several years ago. I'm referring to countries like Azerbaijan or Pakistan or Argentina or Egypt. Emancipating economy, emancipating society. We are developing, we are catching up, and we want to emancipate, not to be as rich, say, as what, Qatar or Norway, but not also to just be a field of emerging speculation opportunity for the rich part of the world. Now, what has not been discussed here, and that is the most interesting issue, that is for another conference, but I have done a little bit of research and published a paper. Democracy, authoritarianism, and development. We are people of academia, so we do not have to be politically correct. But political correctness is the more democracy, the faster the economic development. Not at all. Is the reverse true? Of course not at all. That would be idiocy to say the more of autocracy, the higher the rate of development. It depends. We have to put something more into the equation, just how much of democracy or autocracy you have in a given country. Because somewhere there is meritocracy and somewhere meritocracy is lacking. Take a look. We do not have democracy in the traditional meaning of the term in countries like China or Vietnam or Singapore or the United Arab Emirates. And we do have sound economic growth and even more social economic development. Yeah, we have countries without democracy where we don't have much of growth at all. But we do have some democracies where it's not economic growth. Even in such spectacular democracies like, for instance, Japan or Italy for the last 20 years. Because the question is how much of meritocracy we have within democratic or authoritarian regime. And we have much more of attention to give to this factor. So from this perspective, my other book is called I use the term Chinism. China is a very specific political, ideological, and economic system. It is neither capitalism yet or socialism anymore. Somebody says communist China. Oh my God, what kind of communism it is? Somebody says capitalism. Somebody says corrupted capitalism, state capitalism. Recently I read that it is the political capitalism. No, China has proved that it is not black and white. We have to get rid of the alternative, capitalism or socialism, because there is something different. And the different is very much linked to the game between democracy, autocracy, meritocracy, inclusiveness, and so on. So China is not democracy, but definitely it is not classical capitalism or classical socialism. I refer to it as Chinism, and I think that some countries, including the country like your country, Azerbaijan, may learn sometimes no less from what works and why, and what does not work and why, in case of China than in case, say, of the United States. So I'm proposing new pragmatism. My economic theory, which is coming from all this experience as Deputy Prime Minister, Chairman of Economic Committee of the government, Finance Minister in 4 different governments, who led Poland to OECD, who was at the stewardship of economic policy when we were joining the European Union, who was 33 years ago at the round table, and who is taking a look on macroeconomic strategy, economic policy, and what is coming out from the friction of globalization, that really economics is in crisis. The current economic knowledge is not delivering the answer for the challenges which the economic activity is bringing to our fore. The world is changing so fast. Social, culture, technology, finance, economics, we heard a lot about that. And we still, you know, even if we are publishing our papers 3 months after they have been peer reviewed, or we publish fast books, it is, you know, the story about yesterday or yesteryear and so on. So we have to take a look forward, what is quite difficult because the unpredictability and unsureness about the future is very big. So this new pragmatism is an unorthodox, eclectic, policy-oriented macroeconomic theory which is taking care of coordination between economic balance, dynamic balance that is traditional, input-output, export-import, savings, investment, revenue, expenditure, but also on the one hand, social balance, also dynamic one, which takes into account cultural dimension, which is neglected most of the time by the economists, the narrow-minded economists. Social cohesion, which is much stronger, say, in Finland than in Poland, which is much stronger in Canada than in US, much better in New Zealand, in Australia. Ask the economist why. Why New Zealand, together with Finland, Norway, is always leading in whatever index you will take a look, doing business, corruption, internet readiness, education, clean environment, etc. Because they have good institutions, but also because they are taking into concern social cohesion factor, which is not taken into account in GDP or in the profit from business or rate of return from investment in private sector. And then there is the third component of this equilibrium, dynamic one, that is environment, relation between us and our Mother Earth reality. And here a word, unorthodox. Just finish with orthodoxy if you want to know the answer, what is expecting us in the future. Climate change. Is there the solution to the problem? Yes, there is. Are we going into this direction? Not yet full throttle. COP26 was a partial success. At least, again, US is in. At least there is much more knowledge and admittance by the political class that we have to do something. At least we know what is something implying, etc. But it is not also what Greta Thunberg says, this lovely teenager from Sweden. Blah, blah, blah, blah, blah, blah, she's saying about policymakers. I've been in politics. It is very difficult, you know, to be right and to have majority at the same time. To be right, to be correct, is good at the conference hall or when I'm teaching my students. But when I'm talking to the political opposition in Polish parliament, when I was deputy prime minister, I was right, but I was short in majority. So what you do in democracy, if you are right, you know what to do, because science gives you an advice, but you're not able to execute what's supposed to be done because of misunderstanding, because of the conflict of interest, because of the influence, impact of the special interest groups, etc. The question is how to finance the fight with the climate warming. There's only one way: disarmament, and that is the greatest failure of COP6. That is the very big shame and failure of the virtual summit between President Joe Biden and President Xi Jinping, that they did not touch the issue. Take a look, we are taking it as a granted. It's normal now. It is unnormal that we are engaged in your country, in my country, in so-called East and West, etc., in China and US, in military build-up, in military spiral. Once upon a time, go back. After roundtable in Poland, we brought down the world military spending by 1/3 during 6 years because we finished first Cold War. So now it is the time to say, in Baku, in Warsaw, everywhere, stop this idiotic Cold War, because Cold War is fueling armament. And the business, the military, industrial, political lobbies in each and every country all over the world are very much in favor of sustaining the political tensions because it justifies military expenditure. In my country, for instance, there was just one deputy in our parliament, just one, such a shame, which voted against the law raising the share of military expenditure in our GDP up and up and up. We are the single country out of 29 countries of NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which has the law enforcing our policy to raise the share of so-called defense spending from current, this year is already 2.2 to 2.5. And soon you will see again our nurses and doctors demonstrating on the streets against the policy of the government that there is not enough money because the share during the pandemic time of expenditure for healthcare diminished last year by 0.3%. This is strategy for development, that you are cutting the share of expenditure for healthcare to raise the expenditure for military build-up without any threat of the hot war. But you have to create the blackmail to the society that there is such a risk, because otherwise it won't be accepted. So, fast forward. Presume, utopia, that we freeze the military spending and the current level, on the nominal current level, by the political decision of the political leaders, starting from your president, because why not? Why not country like Azerbaijan is not coming with the initiative to start talking about disarmament, finishing the military build-up spiral, okay? Maybe not already make love, not peace, but just the reverse it. And to give a good example, and it can be followed by some other countries, but of course the decisive voice will be again by United States and China, and no means, but also by Russia and India and some other countries. But if you would freeze the expenditure for military at the current nominal level till the end of the decade, we will get $5.5 trillion US. It's absolutely sufficient to clean the environment and to stay within the 1.5 centigrades warming of the climate. So therefore, I will conclude here, because I've made one more comment about inflation. because it was also said here, and that is another mistake. Not any kind of stagflation. What kind of stagflation? Stagflation means economic stagnation and inflation. There is not an economic stagnation in the consequence of pandemic. There is a robust economic growth. Sometimes we can hardly believe the data. Even in the United States, 5–6% rate of growth of GDP measured in the traditional way. I call it shortageflation 3.0. Long time ago, when you were part of the Soviet Union and we were the member of Comecon, we did have a phenomenon which I coined in English shortageflation, which stands for both shortage and inflation. And now, yes, correct, the great deal of money, and that was good, was pumped into the economy, so-called printed money, to fight the pandemic in the short run. 6% of GDP in the United States, maybe 3% of GDP in case of Poland. I'm not sure how much, but I think something similar to 3% in case of Azerbaijan. And some of this money, this income of both business and household sector was frozen, was forced to be saved. I'm a marathon runner. I signed for Rio Marathon. I saved, say, 4,000 euro, equivalent of. We are not having euro in Poland yet. I didn't go there because it was cancelled. I was sad, I was left with 4,000 euro forced involuntary savings. And now they are opening out the economy. I could come to Baku, I can travel. So the question is what we do with the money. If everybody will go to market to spend the money, of course it will fuel inflation. And we have the delay inflation surge as a price for pandemic. But at the same time, we are not able to spend all the money because some supply has been locked down. And for that reason, it is shortageflation, different by similar like during the World War II in UK or US, or on the so-called centrally planned economy in the former Soviet Union and in Poland. So I will conclude here my comments saying one more time that everything is contextual. One must be very careful. Definitely, in case of Azerbaijan, one has to put into equation economic and not only economic relations with neighboring countries like Turkey and Russia, but I think that we may discuss what we may have in common, how we can, strangely it was not mentioned today, Belt and Road Initiative of China. I think that maybe not it's our fault, but neither Azerbaijan or Poland is taking this great project to the advantage of economic development. So my optimism, if there is any optimism, is that all the problems we do have, inequality, warming in the climate, depletion of non-renewable resources, pandemic, all of them, from economic sensu largo, interdisciplinary viewpoint, they do have the solution. But that does not imply that they will be solved. It's a very risky game. It's very exciting, you know, to be the student of economics this time, because there is so many challenges, there are so many questions we have to look for an answer to, but the problems are solvable, and we have to work to this extent. So thank you for the invitation.
Thank you very much, Professor. Do we have any question from audience to Professor regarding the speech? Yes, please. Yes.
Mikrofon var orada. Xahiş edirik yaxınlaşın, özünüzü təqdim edin və sualı ünvanlayın.
heated.
Texniki məsələlər bir dəqiqə.
I remember when there was a summit between Mr. Gorbachev and President Reagan. When Reagan was trying to speak at Helsinki, the microphone was not working. And Gorbachev said, very much in our way, hit it. Reagan hit it, and it started to work.
Artıq çalışır.
Okay.
Hi. Hi, Mr. Kołodko.
Biraz
First of all-
ucadan zəhmət olmasın.
Hi, Mr. Kołodko. First of all, it's great to see you. Great pleasure to see you here. And I have a question that we talking about the inflation, economic growth, and economic sustainability. My question is, we didn't talking about the blockchain technology and cryptocurrency. I want to know that, in your opinion, for you, what's the effects of the blockchain and especially in the cryptocurrency in economy and inflation? Thank you for your time.
I'm not sure that I will satisfy you with my answer, the more so since I'm not a specialist on this issue, but I don't buy it. I don't trust it, and I don't put so much attention to these cryptocurrencies. I see it basically as a new means of speculation, which is more risky than productive. And for that reason, I'm not surprised that some countries' monetary authorities are altogether forbidding transactions in cryptocurrencies. I'm not talking about President Bukele in Central America and his experiments, but as an economist, I think that as long as it is not clear who is responsible, who must be accountable for what is happening with the price of cryptocurrency, the exchange rate, it is not going to replace the traditional money which will go for all, which is already going more to electronic currency. And electronic currency, I do understand and I support cashless economy, cashless society, but not cryptocurrencies. But again, I'm not a specialist and I don't feel good enough to satisfy your question. But if you would ask me, Professor, maybe you have some savings and sometimes you wonder where to invest or where to keep your savings, would you buy any cryptocurrency? Not at all. So that's answer for your question. I wouldn't buy it because I don't trust it. Then if you ask, don't you feel, somehow wrong that you did not invest in some cryptocurrency 2 years ago and you didn't make 1,000 profits? Well, not really, and I can tell you why. Because these extreme profits of somebody on these cryptocurrencies are at the price of somebody's losses in these cryptocurrencies. And if you say, wait a minute, it was going only up and up and up, then it will be going down and down and down. So it is much more risky, and even if I would make some profits, I wouldn't be happy as a human being that it would be on the cost of somebody else.
Təşəkkür edirik. Bizim hörmətli akademik, Azərbaycan İqtisadçılar İttifaqının sədri Ziyad Səmədzadə də forumda iştirak edir. Ziyad müəllimi dəvət edək. Buyurun Ziyad müəllim.
Çox hörmətli qonaqlar, çox hörmətli professor Kołodko. Mən hesab edirəm ki, Azərbaycanın elmi, iqtisadi, ictimai, siyasi həyatında çox böyük bir tədbir keçirilir və bayaqları hörmətli Ədalət müəllim bəyan etdi ki, hər il belə bir forum keçiriləcək. Əgər hər il belə bir forum keçiriləcəksə, bu foruma ev sahibliyi Ədalət müəllim, Azərbaycan İqtisad İlminin dəyərli nümayəndələrindən biri olan Ədalət müəllim sədrlik edəcəksə, heç şübhəsiz ki, bu bütövlükdə nəinki Azərbaycanı dünyada tanıdacaq, eyni zamanda Azərbaycanı yaxın gələcəkdə mühüm bir iqtisad elminin mərkəzlərindən birinə çevirəcəkdir. Bizim hörmətli professor o qədər zəngin, o qədər mənalı problemlərə toxundu ki, bu problemlər bütün Azərbaycan üçün, bütün dünya üçün ən aktual məsələlərdəndir. Mən bayaqları söhbətimdə Kołodkoya dedim ki, 2015-16-cı illərdə alimin rus dilində kitabları çap olunmuşdu və mən akademik Abalkin və Sençagovna fikirləşdik ki, Kołodkoya bir məktub yazaq. Mən əl yazmanı göstərərəm sizə ki, 5 il bundan qabaq professor Kołodkonun fikirləri sözün əsl mənasında bir çox istiqamətlərdə Azərbaycanın milli maraqları ilə üz-üzə gəlirdi. Bir gün də o qloballaşma haqqında çox dərin, ilk baxışdan ziddiyyətli görünən, amma sözün əsl mənasında qloballaşmanın mahiyyəti, qloballaşmanın müsbət cəhətləri, mənfi cəhətləri, qloballaşma mənfi müsbət cəhətlər arasında optimal həddin tapılması barədə baxışlarını mən yüksək qiymətləndirirəm. Və burada gənclərin də olmasından istifadə edərək, Ulu Öndər Heydər Əliyev BMT-də də çıxış eləyəndə, Cənab Prezidentə də, Prezident İlham Əliyev də qloballaşma ilə əlaqədar fikirlərini demişdi. Bu qaçılmaz bir prosesdir. Amma sən görək, elə hərəkət etməlisən ki, dövlətin bu qaçılmaz prosesdə milli maraqlarına ziyan dəyməsin. Biz qalib gəldik müharibədə. 44 gün ərzində qalib gəldik müharibədə. Neyin hesabına? Ona görə ki, qloballaşmanın mənfi cəhətlərindən uzaq olduq. Müstəqil siyasət yeritdik, müstəqil iqtisadi siyasət yeritdik. Və bu iqtisadi siyasətimizi ölkənin milli maraqları ilə əlaqələndirdik. Mən çox sevinirəm ki, bir gün dinlədikcə professor Kołodkonu hesab edirəm ki, bir gün iqtisadçıların da bayramıdır. Təbii ki, burada bir neçə məsələlər var ki, o məsələlər bizi də düşündürür, hörmətli professor da dedi. Mən məlumat vermək istəyirəm ki, Azərbaycan qədim İpək yolunun Traseka proqramının Azərbaycandan keçməsinin bilavasitə təşəbbüskarıdır. 1993-cü ildə Brüssel müqaviləsi bağlanıb, Brüssel bəyannaməsi. 8 respublika orada bu barədə imza atmışdılar ki, qədim İpək yolu Avropadan gəlib Qafqazdan Bakı vasitəsilə Çinə gedəcək. Biz buna nail olduq. 98-ci ildə Bakı sammiti keçirildi. Yəni, bir gün məlumat vermək istəyirəm ki, Zəngəzur koridoru da açılacaq, Bakı-Tiflis-Qars da əhəmiyyətli dərəcədə inkişaf edəcək, bizim ələt iqtisadi zonamız var və s. Mən eyni zamanda istərdim ki, bayaqları mənə deyək ki, Soljenitsin bir fikir söylədi, mən o fikirlə razılaşa bilmərəm. O təklif etdi ki, Azərbaycanda kənd təsərrüfatı, logistika, bir də turizm. Qalan sahələr bəs nə olsun? Kənd təsərrüfatında bir gün bizim 35% əhalimiz çalışır. Biz elə etməliyik, gələcəkdə əmək məhsuldarlığı artacaq. Avropada isə bu cəmi rəqəm 4-5%'dir. Biz görək yeni iş yerləri yaradaq. Yeni iş yerlərini harada yaradacaq? Sənayinin digər sahələrində. Ona görə heç cürə mən razılaşa bilmərəm ki, mənim Azərbaycan iqtisadiyyatının gələcəyini biz 3 sahəyə bağlayaq. Bu, Azərbaycanın milli maraqlarına cavab vermir. Turizm də ola bilər, amma professor Kołodko iqlim məsələlərindən danışdı. Dünyanı narahat edən iqlim problemidir. O iqlim probleminin də xeyli hissəsi insanla əlaqədərdir. 10 milyon, 15 milyon, 20 milyon biz turist qəbul edə bilmərik. Hər turistin qastinsası var, tullantılar var, ərzaq var və s. Amma bizim güclü maşınqayırma sənayimiz olmalıdır, sənaye parkları yaradırıq. Vaxtilə Bakı SSR sənayesinin 70%'ni neft maşınqayırmasını verirdi. Yəni, demək istəyirəm ki, bayaq professor da dedi, iqtisadiyyatın şaxələndirilməsi, neftdən asıllığın azaldılması. Bu istiqamətdə də Cənab Prezidentin mövqeyi çox düzgündür. Artıq biz neft fondumuz var, valyuta ehtiyatlarımız var və məsələ qoyulub ki, biz, Cənab Professor dediyi kimi, biz sənayinin strukturunu təkmilləşdirək. Onun tərkibində emal sənayesinin, innovasiyalı iqtisadiyyatın rolunu artıraq. Mən çox vaxtınızı almaq istəmirəm, mən bir daha sizə təşəkkür edirəm. Bu belə alimlərin Azərbaycana dəvət olunması və fikir mübadiləsi aparmaq. Bəzi məsələlər var ki, doğrudan da mübahisə doğurur. Mən məsəl üçün professorun gəlirlərin diferensiyasiyası barədə fikirlərini çox alqışlayıram. Tox dünya var, ac dünya var. 50 il bundan qabaq da belə olub, 100 il bundan qabaq da olub. Bunun kökündə nə dayanır? Kökündə standart tövsiyələrin ölkələrə verilməsi. Balçeroviç olub, cənab bizim professor. Bunlar həqiqətən Polşa iqtisadiyyatında böyük reform etdilər. Düşünülmüş şəkildə islahatlar apardılar ki, bugün artıq adam başına düşən məhsulun miqdarına görə Polşa qabaqcıl ölkələr sırasına çatır. Mən bir daha sizə təşəkkür edirəm. Siz çox böyük alim, ziyalı, eyni zamanda necə deyərlər, dünyanın nəbzini, qloballaşmanın nəbzini obyektiv tutan, tamamilə düz dedi. Bir il ərzində, bir neçə il ərzində bizi zorla, hörmətli professor, bizi zorla iqtisadiyyatımızın çox aşağı olduğu şəraitdə Ümumdünya Ticarət Təşkilatına daxil edirdilər. Getmədik çünki bizim əmək məhsuldarlığı aşağı, qiymət aşağı və s. Stiglitzlə mən hesab edirəm ki, Nobel mükafatı laureatı Stiglitzlə sizin baxışlarınız arasında eyni cəhətlər var, elə məsələlər var ki, mən onunla 2004-cü ildə Bakıda görüşdük, bizim fikirlərimiz ona çatdırdıq və mən çox sevinirəm ki, sizin kimi insanlar dünyanın oyun qaydalarını dəyişdirə bilərsiniz. Dünyanın oyun qaydalarını dəyişdirmək, yəni dünya bir yerdən idarə oluna bilməz. Dünyanın oyun qaydaları var, Polşanın da, Azərbaycanın da, Türkiyənin də, Gürcüstanın da, hər bir ölkənin maraqları var. Bu maraqlar nəzərə alınmalıdır. Mən sizə təşəkkür edirəm, hesab edirəm ki, sizin bugünkü çıxışınız stenoqrammasını yəqin alacaq. Uzun illər Azərbaycan iqtisadçıları üçün bir müzakirə obyekti olacaqdır. Sizə təşəkkür edirəm. Sağ olun.
Çox sağ olun Ziyad müəllim, biz sizə təşəkkür edirik. Buyurun, cənab Kołodkoya söz verilir, buyurun.
Thank you for these words, Professor. I wouldn't ever appreciate my train of my thought of economic policies for the others, but traveling a lot, I see that it is making some impact. Maybe also in Azerbaijan, I would be happy to see it. So I appreciate your words. I had the privilege to meet your great president, Mr. Aliyev, 25 years ago, when I was first time to this great small country in my political capacity. At that time, it was fun because I was Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. That was the first state visit at such a big rank. But I was, first of all, Professor of Economics. So I felt I was allowed to speak politically incorrect. And I was talking very frankly with President Aliyev what I think about this and that, giving also a little bit, maybe not giving advice, but sharing my experience. Maybe some of these points somehow made an impact. When I was second time here, in February of 2014, that was at the invitation of somebody completely different. The Anglo-American famous, I appreciate very much, weekly, The Economist. And that was the economic discussion basically for the financial sector, business people, where I felt the competition between what I call now new pragmatism and this neoliberal approach. Third, I share your viewpoint. If you will stay with the triple sector economy, oil, agriculture, and tourism, it will not catch up very much. You have to take advantage of your oil for microeconomic restructuring and diversification of the real sphere of the economy. But if I'm right, that globalization is irreversible, and if we are right, that that is because of the indispensability of the supply chains, the question is, and it calls for economic analysis, Rector, in what supply chains, by what means, to what degree Azerbaijan is engaged? Because now maybe Turkey or Russia, or maybe we in Poland, or they in China, they want to get rid of you from the supply chain because somebody else would like to replace your businesses, etc. But there is the movement, there is a shake in the aftermath of the pandemic. If you start from the confrontation between US and China, it is very much about supply chains, because China has proved because of Chinism, the system and their politics, very much against the Western dictum. They were moving up and up and up on supply chain to more value added, to more knowledge-based value added. When you've been first time to China 20 years ago, what could you buy to your girlfriend or your wife? Just, you know, a night gown or maybe the coffee pot. Now, you can buy almost everything only if you have money. And they are moving up and up and up. And if one is moving up and up and up, somebody may be moved outside of the supply chain. And this is, you know, conflicting, and it makes some business people and policymakers nervous. So now going to the positive side of this thinking, I would make microeconomic analysis. This is a job for McKinsey, for instance, where Azeri business is entrepreneurship on the global supply chains, and when you can move upward to make contribution with more knowledge-based new value, and then to make your economy more competitive on macroeconomic scale. And definitely still taking advantage of energy sector and tourism, it must be something more close to manufacturing or new kind of services, and then the economy will be much more able to answer the challenges. My last point is, take advantage of your geopolitical position. Where you're going to, Azerbaijan? Is it safe there? Don't go there. Not because of the COVID, because of the political and military situation, etc. If I was Azeri, well, maybe not president or deputy prime minister, because there is diplomacy and political correctness. But if I was a professor at UEF, I'm saying, go to Azerbaijan, make business with these people. They are knowledgeable, they're open-minded, and contrary to some neighbors, not only Iran, but also Turkey and Georgia and Russia, they are much more accountable and responsible and predictable because of their political regime, which you may like or you may not, and because of their culture. Azerbaijan is more accountable, is more predictable than the countries I mentioned in this region of the world, which is interconnected, which is the good news for the international global business investor, financiers. They can still call you, and they will, emerging market. I will call you emancipating economy, because if you will take into advantage what I'm saying, I think you will be much more emancipated, despite neoliberals will still refer to you as emerging market, seeing this country as a small point on the map of the world where they can make a profit, not necessarily on the behalf of the people here. But I have the behalf of the people all over the world as my main concern. So thank you again for the invitation.
Təşəkkür edirik. Alqışlarınız. Hörmətli görüş iştirakçıları, Qrzeqorz Kołodkonin ilə görüşümüz bununla da yekunlaşır. Hörmətli cənab Kołodkoya, cənab Muradlıya və iştirakçılara gəldiyiniz üçün təşəkkür edirik. Qeyd edək ki, 3 gün davam edəcək forumda olan bütün panelləri və görüşləri UNEC sosial şəbəkə hesablarından canlı yayım vasitəsilə izləyə bilərsiniz. Təşəkkürlər bir daha.